today's video lecture, and in today's video lecture I'll be solving previous year's NEET questions and discussing the answers. And as you can see on your screen, it is for the chapter locomotion and movement, and we are in part 1 of the series. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so question number 1. Calcium is important in skeletal muscle contraction because this appeared in NEET 2018. Okay, and we have 4 options. Let's go through the options. A. Binds to troponin to remove the masking of active sites on actin for myosin. B. Activates the myosin ATPase by binding to it. C. Detaches the myosin head from the actin filament. D. Prevents the formation of bonds between the myosin cross bridges and the actin filament. Okay, so it is clearly A. Okay, this is a part of muscle contraction. So when you go back and read NCERT and then come back and answer this question, you will know that A is the answer. So calcium, how is it important? It binds to troponin. Okay, there are 3 types of troponin. We'll come to that, to remove the masking of active sites on actin for myosin. So clearly your answer should be A. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So there are 3 types of troponin, like I just said. Let's go through the 3 types. So troponin I has a strong affinity for actin. Troponin T has a strong affinity for tropomyosin. And troponin C has a strong affinity for calcium. Okay, so this is the main troponin that is active. Okay, that is there for calcium. So now when calcium binds to troponin C, what happens? The troponin tropomyosin complex covers the active sites for the attachment of myosin molecules, which is the normal structure. Okay, if you see the structure, there are actin and tropomyosin molecules that are intertwined together, right? And so this troponin is present on top of it, and so this troponin tropomyosin complex covers the active sites for the attachment of myosin molecules. Now when calcium binds, calcium ions, they bind to troponin C, a conformational change occurs in the troponin molecule, which allows the tropomyosin molecule to move deeper into the groove, and this exposes the active site. So what happens is, like I said, when calcium ions bind to troponin C, a figurative change occurs in the troponin molecule. Okay, and this allows the tropomyosin molecule to move deeper into the groove. Okay, it will come there. There's a good structure of the troponin tropomyosin molecules. So the tropomyosin molecule moves deeper into the groove, and this exposes the active site. The active sites are present, okay, on top of that tropomyosin. Alright, the actin and tropomyosin. So that calcium ions, when they bind to troponin C, the tropomyosin then is able to change its structure in such a way that the active sites get exposed. Okay. So once the active sites are exposed, it attracts the binding of myosin cross bridge heads, and hence contraction occurs. Okay, so when the active sites are available for attachment, the myosin heads then attach to those active sites. I'll show you a diagram so you will be able to understand. Yeah, so here, see, now the tropomyosin is in a groove-like structure, and you see the active sites is black colored dots here. These are the active sites. Okay, and you have your troponin complex over here, right? And obviously this is the actin, F actin, and the tropomyosin. Now once calcium ions, they bind to troponin C, this changes in such a way that the active sites then get exposed. Okay, this is what's actually happening. Active sites get exposed, and then what happens? Then the myosin heads attached to those active sites. The active sites are now available for attachment, and then obviously when the myosin head attaches to the active site, the cross bridge is formed. Okay, so calcium ions, that is how they are important. Okay, if you go back to our question here, yeah, calcium is important in skeletal muscle contraction because it binds to troponin to remove the masking of active sites on actin for myosin. Okay, So clearly A is the answer, and this appeared in NEET 2018. Okay, I think the diagram, I hope that helped you understand a bit better. Yeah. Okay, let me know in the comments if you like the diagrams that I put here, right? Okay, so question number 2. Okay, name the ion responsible for unmasking of active sites for myosin for cross-bridge activity during muscle contraction. This appeared in 2016. Okay, now which ion is responsible for, we just answered this, right, in question number 1. The ion that is responsible for unmasking of active sites for myosin for cross-bridge activity during muscle contraction is clearly calcium. Okay, so your answer should be A. All right, let's go to discussion. I don't think there is any need for discussion. This is the same answer that I have previously put. So like I said, troponin C has strong affinity for calcium, and so when calcium ions bind to that, it causes a conformational change, okay, in the troponin molecule, which allows for the tropomyosin to expose. It digs deeper and it exposes the active sites for myosin head to attach to it to form a cross bridge. Okay, so it's the same question, a similar question. I mean, this topic is important. Okay, so I would suggest you read this in NCERT. Okay. Okay, next question. Lack of relaxation between successive stimuli in sustained muscle contraction is known as. This appeared in 2016. Okay, so you have A, tetanus, B, tonus, C, spasm, and D, fatigue. Okay, so for the answer, it should be A. The appropriate answer should be A. But ideally, it is not known as tetanus. Tetanus is a disease, right, which is caused by a bacteria called Clostridium tetani. In this case, this is known as actually tetany. Tetany and tetanus are different things. Okay, so please don't get confused. But like I said, the appropriate answer is A in this. We'll come to what tetany means. Okay, the answer should be A. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, before I go and teach you what tetany means, let's understand what tetanization means. Okay, what tetanization means. So the tetanization is a rapid successive muscle contraction due to increased frequency. Okay, now what that means is, let's say I have a muscle cell. Okay, I have a muscle cell over here. Let's say, striated muscle cells over here. Okay, and we have nuclei, multinucleated. Okay, now what I do is, this is only how experimentally I would do. Okay, this is not what's happening in the body. I put an electric probe to it. Okay, I put an electric probe to it, and I'm continuously stimulating the muscle. Okay, now I stimulated 1 time, I stimulated 2 times, stimulated 3 times. Frequency is low, 4 times, 5 times. I stimulated, take a break, stimulated, take a break, stimulated, take a break. Okay, it's not so much. The frequency is not very high. Okay, the stimulation frequency. Okay, but what happens is, when I'm continuously stimulated, that means the probe just sticks onto this muscle cell. That means it's constantly being stimulated. Okay, that is the rapid successive muscle contraction that is happening. Okay, every time I put that probe there, and now what happens, now the frequency has increased and I'm doing quickly. Okay, so every time I press the probe, when I'm doing it slowly, my frequency is less. Okay, it's okay, it's slow. Okay, I can see the muscle twitch individually. Okay, you can see it very clearly. But as I'm increasing the frequency, what happens? Then you can't even differentiate between muscle twitches. Before any rest, it starts stimulated again. That's when it contracts again. Okay, every time there's no break between one stimuli and another stimuli. Okay, there's no break between one contraction and another contraction, one twitch and another twitch. Okay, it is continuously activated. Okay, it is continuously contacting. Okay, so this is just a hypothetical situation. Experimentally, how would you see it, right? Now, say, now this is due to the presence of calcium ions in the, one second, sorry. This is due to the presence of calcium ions in the muscle sarcoplasm, okay? Even between action potentials. That means, see, once one action potential is generated, muscle contraction happens, calcium ions move away. But here, it's due to the presence of calcium ions in the muscle sarcoplasm, even between the action potentials, it is still there. That means it will always be the muscles will always remain in the contracted state all the time. Okay, just like what I showed you over here experimentally. It's continuously being contracted. Okay, hence full contractile state is maintained without relaxation between action potentials, right? Makes sense, because if in the body, if calcium ions are still present there, the muscle will always remain activated. Okay, the active sites are always exposed. It will be continuously activated. There's no break even between action potentials. This is actually called tetanization. Okay, so yeah, so here is a good graph like what I explained to you. Okay, so you have the strength of muscle contraction on the y-axis and the rate of stimulation. Okay, that is times per second. Okay, how many times? Now frequency was very low in the beginning. Okay, very low rate per second, only 5, 10, 15. It's okay, we can individually see those twitches. It's fine. But what happens when the frequency begins to increase, the rate of stimulation begins to increase? Okay, now this is tetanization, where you can't even differentiate. When even before one action potential has ended, it has again been stimulated. Okay, so muscle is always remaining contracted. Okay, it always remains in a contracted state. This is actually called tetanization. Okay, this word is called tetanization. Okay, so we've understood tetanization now. Now muscle tetany. Okay, muscle tetany is the sustained muscle contraction due to decrease of blood calcium ion concentration. Now muscle tetany, when it happens, okay, there's sustained muscle contraction, and this happens due to blood calcium ion concentration dropping. Okay, and blood in the blood, okay, please don't confuse this to the sarcoplasm. In the blood, if the concentration, calcium ion concentration drops, okay, even up to 50%, okay, this will be a very big cause of concern. It could lead to muscle tetany, especially in the respiratory muscles. Okay, so if the respiratory muscles are continuously in the tetanized state, what will happen? Obviously you can't breathe, right? They are contracted all the time. Ideally what you do, you breathe, you relax, you inhale, you exhale, you relax the muscles, right? They'll always be contracted, so that is very dangerous. It could be fatal. Okay, so a fall of less than 50% of normal calcium ion concentration blood could lead to muscle tetany. Okay, this could lead to muscle. Now we understood what tetanization means. So now you can imagine, in this case, physiologically, if the calcium ion concentration in the blood drops to even like fall of less than 50%, it could lead to muscle tetany, and sometimes lethal due to tetanic contraction of respiratory muscle. Like I said, no, respiratory muscles, you inhale, you exhale, it has to relax, but if it's always in the contracted state, what will happen? Then it will be a cause of concern, right? You can't inhale, you can't exhale, you can't even relax your muscles, always be contracted, which is not a good sign. So that is why it could be lethal. Now when neurons are firing the stimulus, right, to the muscle, now we know that, please refer to neuronal control and coordination, okay, nervous system, in your book for detail. If you don't follow what I'm saying, please go read that. We have sodium channels here. They are sodium gated, voltage gated channels. Okay, sodium voltage gated channels. Okay, now they obviously cause depolarization of the neuron. right? Now what I'm trying to tell you is how low calcium affects this muscle tetany. Okay, they are always obviously when depolarization occurs, sodium voltage gated channels, they function at a particular voltage, right? So depolarization occurs, sodium ions move in, but this is due to the calcium ions present in the blood. Now how do these sodium channels function? Because of calcium ions in the blood. There's a lot of calcium ions in the extracellular fluid. Okay, there's a lot of calcium ions present there, and they have a very profound effect on the voltage gated channels, sodium voltage gated channels. Now how that is? Now imagine if you have this sodium voltage gated channels. Okay, you have calcium ions, they attach actually to these gated channels, the proteins over here, and change. Okay, they then cause depolarization. Okay, at that time, okay, these calcium ions, they attach to these protein channels over here, and they allow depolarization to happen, okay, at a particular voltage, right? This is how depolarization occurs. We usually don't talk about it. I don't think textbooks do, as an NCERT talks about the role of calcium ions, but this is what's actually happening. So now imagine if calcium ions were absent or very low concentration. I wouldn't say absent, but they were very low concentration. That is, they drop to 50% of normal calcium ion concentration. Okay, what if that happens? Then these voltage gated channels become very sensitive. Okay, even they become even negative. Now you know the resting voltage is actually minus 90 millivolts. It will drop even further, it will become even more negative. Okay, that means it has become even more sensitive. Okay, with the absence or the drop of calcium ion concentration in the blood. Okay, these neurons become even more sensitive. That means they quickly depolarize even before minus 90 millivolts. That become even less, they become even more negative. Okay, they become very sensitive to this. They suddenly depolarize even without giving any stimulus. Okay, now once this stimulus is gone through, the muscle will contract again. It is gone through, muscle will contract. Even there's no rest, this continuously firing stimulus to the muscle, and the muscle is contracting. Okay, this is what muscle tetany is, and this is how the drop in calcium ion concentration affects the neurons, right? So what happens is, it becomes, just imagine, I'll give you a good analogy if you can relate to it. Just imagine if somebody is a light sleeper at night. Okay, so even a small drop, a doorbell, not even a doorbell, let's say even like a book falling off will suddenly wake them up, right? Or small like a noise somewhere, would wake them up suddenly. Those are light sleepers, right? So suddenly you get, if you wake up from your sleep and you're like, oh my god, okay, again it's just night now, I go back to sleep. Again they wake up with just they're very sensitive people. Again they'll wake up, with just a small sound here and there, a horn outside the building, or a dog barking or something like that. They would wake up. They're very light sleepers. I'm just giving you an example. But what if somebody was a very deep sleeper? Okay, he or she would sleep at night, but even if there's a doorbell ringing, there's a siren, or somebody's mobile phone's ringing, they wouldn't care. They'd be completely asleep. Okay, so they are not sensitive to even small sounds. I'm just giving you an example and analogy so that you can understand what this means. Okay, so these neurons become very sensitive to this stimulus. Okay, and yeah, so that happens when there is a drop in calcium ions in the blood. That means calcium ions are very, very important to maintain. Okay, this drop is very dangerous, like I said, could be lethal also, right? So I hope that answers your question. So it's actually called muscle tetany. Okay, but okay, the appropriate answer in this case was tetanus. That is A, so you choose A. Let's go back to the question. Okay, so tetanus is the tetany is the lack of relaxation between successive stimuli and sustained muscle contraction. B, tonus is a partial contraction that is maintained in your muscles to maintain a posture, right? You stand upright, your back is contracted, right? So that's partial contraction to maintain your body posture. Okay, Spasm is the sudden involuntary muscle contraction. Okay, it is different from tetany. Actually, tetany can be a symptom of spasm. Okay, and fatigue is overusing your muscle. Okay, the muscles become exhausted, so they become tired. Fatigue means tired. So when you overuse your muscle too much, it causes fatigue. But like in this case, lack of relaxation between successive stimuli and sustained muscle contraction is called tetany. Okay, answer should be A. You've understood tetanization. You remember the graph that I showed you. Think about it that way, continuously being stimulated. The muscles continuously being stimulated. So it will always be remain in a contracted state, right? Okay, next question. Okay, so question number 4. Sliding filament theory can be best explained as, and this appeared in 2015, so cancelled exam, I guess. Okay, so A, actin and myosin filaments do not shorten but rather slide past each other. B, when myofilaments slide past each other, myosin filaments shorten while actin filaments do not shorten. C, when myofilaments slide past each other, actin filaments shorten while myosin filaments do not shorten. D, actin and myosin filaments shorten, slide past each other. Okay, so sliding filament theory can be best explained as A, actin and myosin filaments do not shorten but they rather slide past each other. Okay, so answer should be A. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, so according to the sliding filament theory, when muscles in a contracted state, the Z discs pull towards each other and the actin and myosin filaments slide over each other. And due to the cross bridges formed, the myosin pulls the actin filaments, an action called a power stroke with the help of ATP. There's a diagram here. Yeah. Okay, so this is taken from NCERT. Please study the NCERT diagrams very carefully. Okay. Alright, so here, simple, right? So I've already explained how that cross bridge is formed, right, with the active sites, okay, of actin. And myosin head attaches to that. So you have your, let's see, actin over here and the myosin head attaches to it. Okay. It forms a cross bridge with actin. Okay, now there is ATPase activity happening at the myosin head. ATPase activity happening, that means obviously muscles, they need energy, okay, to contract. Like I need to pull anything or I need to pick up something. I'm using my muscles. I need energy for that, right? So ATPase activity is present in the myosin head, which converts ATP to ADP. ATP to ADP. Sorry, ADP. Okay, this is how energy is created, and this power stroke pull is there. Okay, it pushes forward. Okay, that is called a power stroke. Another nice analogy I can give you here. I thought about it and I thought it was quite interesting. Maybe you guys, if any of you are interested, can listen to it, or else just let it go. Is that you, I don't know if all of you or any of you have sat in a rowing boat. Okay, in a rowing boat. You have a rowing boat here. Okay, so there's a person sitting over here. Okay, and he or she is rowing the boat. So you have an oar. Okay, the stick-like thing that they pull against, that's called an oar. Right? Now just imagine the water is the actin filament. And this is the myosin filament. Now, do you know where I'm getting at? I'm talking about the power stroke, right? So what happens? The actin filament is flat and the myosin filament has a head which attaches to the actin filament. And you're pulling. The person sitting on the rowboat is pulling. Just imagine it that way. I don't know if it seems far-fetched or whether you were able to relate to this analogy, but this is what's actually happening. Okay, the myosin head is then pulling, it is moving forward. Okay, and that's called a power stroke, and that obviously happens with the help of ATP. So yeah, so over here is a diagram from NCERT which shows two sarcomeres. This is relaxed. This is the contracting position. This is when it's maximally contracted. Okay, and this is the sliding filament theory. To answer our question, yes, now you can see myosin is here and this is actin. Okay, actin over here and this is myosin. What have they done? They just slid past each other. Nothing is being, decreasing in size or increasing in size. They're just sliding past each other. Okay, so to answer your question, yes, according to the sliding filament theory, yeah, actin and myosin filaments do not shorten, but they rather slide past each other. This is actually a very important question. Please study all this carefully. Okay, it's there in NCERT. So study this theory properly, study muscle contraction properly. Okay, next question. Question number 5. Stimulation of a muscle fiber by a motor neuron occurs at, this appeared in 2014. You have A, the neuromuscular junction, B, the transverse tubules, C, the myofibril, D, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Clearly, stimulation of a muscle fiber by a motor neuron occurs at the neuromuscular junction. The answer is A. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So the neuromuscular junction or motor end plate, another name for it is motor end plate. Okay, it is the junction between a motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber. Okay, it is the junction between a motor neuron and the sarcolemma, that is the plasma membrane part of the muscle fiber. The branching nerve terminals invaginates the surface of the plasma membrane of the muscle fiber. Now what happens is motor neuron itself is big in size. Okay, and let's say you have a huge muscle here. Okay, now the motor neuron doesn't directly go and forms a junction with the muscle itself. It branches out. Okay, it begins to branch out. Okay, because it is such a big neuron, it will not just directly go and form a junction with the muscle. It tends to branch out. Now these branches will then attach to the different muscles. Okay, these branches then will attach to different muscles. Now these branches can vary from 3 to several thousands. Okay, and these branching terminals, they form the junction with the muscle fiber. It's not the direct motor neuron which is going there. Okay, these branching terminals, they form an invagination. It is the junction is actually an invagination. If you've studied the structure of lung, you have the pleural membrane. That pleural membrane forms an invagination with the lungs. Okay, the pleural membrane, it forms an invagination with the lungs, and I will show you a diagram of the neuromuscular junction. We will be able to understand that clearly. Now the junction is covered by Schwann cells that insulates it from surrounding fluids. Extra piece of information for your understanding. Okay, there are Schwann cells present around that insulates it from surrounding fluid. Okay, so here this is a good diagram of the neuromuscular junction. I guess it's okay. Yeah, so this is what I mean by invagination here. Okay, this is an invagination. Now this area is called, now this is the small part over here. Okay, after the branching has happened, it is attached, not attached, but it forms a junction with the muscle fiber. This is the muscle here, this pink portion over here is the muscle, and this is the neuron. Okay, now this part is called the synaptic trough. Okay, synaptic trough, or it's also called a synaptic gutter. Okay, this is called this white portion over here, you see here, it's called the synaptic space. Okay, this part is called the synaptic space, this white part. Now you see these clefts, it's called subneural clefts. You see these clefts forming over here. Okay, it is interesting how these clefts are designed, or why are they designed? They are designed to increase the surface area, to maximize the surface area for attachment, or for neurotransmitters to attach to that. Okay, that is why they formed as clefts. So what they do is, just for your information, don't worry, it is just to increase the surface area. Okay, so these are called subneural clefts over here. Okay, the space you see is called the synaptic space. This white portion, okay, it's called synaptic space. And here, this part that you see over here, this neuron, is the synaptic trough or the synaptic gutter. Two names to it. This yellow portion you see here, those are synaptic vesicles where neurotransmitter is stored. Okay, so basically this is what a neuromuscular junction looks like. Okay, so now you're clear, the three parts to it, right? And you see how that is occurring. They are actually branching out. The motor neuron is not directly attaching itself to the muscle fiber. They are branching out, okay, into terminals, nerve terminals. Okay, now I've showed you what a motor end plate looks like, or neuromuscular junction looks like. Motor end plate. But there's another term called motor unit, and please don't confuse this with motor end plate. Motor unit is the whole structure, this muscle and the motor neuron. The whole structure, it includes the motor neuron as well as the muscle, okay? That whole structure is called motor unit, okay? Motor end plate or neuromuscular junction is the branching nerve terminals that then attach to the muscle. So if you ever get this in the exam, you know what I'm talking about. This is what a motor unit looks like, okay? It includes the motor neuron, the whole motor neuron, okay, that is forming the junction with that muscle. But here you can see, now you have a clear picture. So you see this red portion or the pink portion here is actually a muscle fiber, okay, it's the muscle fiber, and these are the branching terminals that are forming junctions with the muscles, right? So this part is called the motor end plate, whereas the whole part is called motor unit. Okay, this particular portion is called a motor end plate, okay, that I just showed you the previous diagram. Yeah, so this is a motor end plate, a neuromuscular junction, whereas this whole portion is called a motor unit, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so if you ever get this in the exam, don't get confused. Now you know what it means. Okay, for this, just for your information. Okay, next question. Question number 6. The H zone in the skeletal muscle fiber is due to disappear in 2013 NEET. Now we're talking about the H zone. H zone, the central, option A, the central gap between actin filaments extending through myosin filaments in the A band. B, extension of myosin filaments in the central portion of the A band. C, the absence of myofibrils in the central portion of the A band. D, the central gap between myosin filaments in the A band. Okay. Ideally, the answer is A. It is the central gap between actin filaments extending through myosin filaments in the A band. Okay, the answer should be A. Let's go to the discussion. So, the H zone, I'll just go to the diagram. Yeah, so this is actually from NCERT. So, please study the diagrams of NCERT. So H zone over here is the gap. It's the gap between actin filaments and extending through the myosin filaments in the A band. Obviously, we're talking about A band. Okay. So it is the gap between actin filaments and extending through the myosin filaments in the A band. Clearly, they were testing you on the structure of sarcomere. So you need to know the structure of sarcomere very, very carefully for your exam. Okay, they've asked a few questions related to I band, A band, H zone, all these questions. So I would suggest you clearly read NCERT because everything is mentioned there properly for your exam. Anything could come. Okay, I think this was a direct question. There's not much explanation required. You need to understand the anatomy of the muscle, the sarcomere. Next question. Okay, so question number 7. During muscle contraction in humans, okay, and this appeared in Karnataka NEET 2013. During muscle contraction in humans, the sarcomere does not shorten. Okay, A band remains same. A, H and I bands shorten. Actin filaments shorten. So during muscle contraction, clearly A band remains the same. Sarcomere comes together, eye bands shorten, actin filaments, they don't shorten. Remember sliding filament 3, they just slide past the myosin actin filaments just slide past each other. So your answer is B. Let's go to the discussion. So during muscle contraction, I band shortens, A band remains the same. Again, this is another very important topic. This has also been asked multiple times, so I would suggest you remember this. Okay, so again we come back to the diagram from NCERT. So what happens now? You know what the A band is. Sorry, let me erase this part. Yeah, so you know this A band over here. You know the A band. Sorry, not the A band. The I band over here and over here, right? Now when it is maximally contracted, clearly the I band is non-existent. It has shortened completely. Okay. Whereas the A band does not really change. Where is the A band? A band is just from here to here. Okay. Even when it's maximally contracted, it is just from here to here. So A band remains the same. The I band, when it is maximally contracted, clearly it is shortening or it completely disappears. Okay. So this happens during muscle contraction, clearly, obviously. But this is a very important piece of information for you to remember for your exam. Okay, so I guess there's not much explanation to this. Yeah, during muscle contraction humans, A band remains the same. Okay, to answer your question. Okay, next question. Question number 8. The type of muscle present in our, okay, this appeared in 2011. A. Heart is involuntary and unstriated smooth muscle. B. Intestine is striated and involuntary. C. Thigh is striated and voluntary. D. Upper arm is smooth muscle and fusiform in shape. So heart is involuntary, yes, but it is not unstriated smooth muscle. It's a cardiac muscle. So that's clearly wrong. B. Intestine is striated and involuntary. No. Thigh is striated and voluntary. Yes. Answer is C. Upper arm is smooth muscle and fusiform in shape. No. That is incorrect. So your answer is C. Let's go to the discussion. Okay, so cardiac muscles are involuntary, right? But it has the appearance of striated muscle. Okay, and they are made up of elongated fibers containing numerous myofibrils, and striations are similar to skeletal muscle. So they function involuntarily, right? Obviously, but they have the appearance of striated muscles. Okay, they are similar to the striation that are similar to skeletal muscles. They are innervated by autonomic nerves, obviously, and hence are involuntary in function, obviously. Intestine. Now, intestine has smooth and involuntary muscle. Okay, so these muscles, they have a broad central part and tapering ends. Okay, they have a broad central part and tapering ends. Right? Okay, and the nucleus is oval and elongated. Okay, is present in the central part of the cell. I have nice diagrams which show you the real picture of these muscles. It's coming up soon. The nucleus is oval and elongated and is present in the central part of the cell. The smooth muscles are innervated by the autonomic nervous system. Thigh and upper arm are skeletal muscles. Obviously, they are voluntary in function. Okay, I'm moving my upper arm. Okay, it's voluntary in function. And they are long cylindrical fibers, and each fiber is syncytium. Okay, that means they have multinucleated. Okay, they are multinucleated, and each nuclei are elongated and are present at the periphery of the fiber. So if it's a muscle like this, okay, they are multinucleated. Okay, and they're present at the periphery of the fiber. Okay, so clear? I've explained it. So we've covered cardiac muscle. Obviously, they are involuntary in nature, but they appear as striated skeletal muscles. Okay, and intestine smooth muscles, and they're involuntary in nature. And the thigh and upper arm obviously are skeletal muscle cells. So to answer your question, yeah, thigh striated, sorry, thigh striated and voluntary. Obviously you're lifting it at your control. It's voluntary, you're doing it, right? It's not just automatically happening it. And upper arm is also voluntary, it is not a smooth muscle. Okay. See what we have here. We have 3 different diagrams. I would suggest pause the video. I'll tell you which each is. Okay, this is what the actual muscle looks like. Okay, which each one is. But I would suggest you pause the video and let me know in the comments if you were able to guess which muscle is which. Okay. All right. So over here, can you guess this one? The first diagram over here. This is clearly striated muscle. Okay, this is clearly striated muscle. You see the nucleus, the multinucleated, and they're present in the periphery. Okay, so the nucleus is purple circles you see here. This one is the smooth muscle. It's a smooth muscle. Here you can see these structures here. Okay, they have a broad central part and they are tapering at the ends, and they have nucleus in the middle, right? So these are smooth muscles. These are clearly cardiac muscles. What you have here, these black lines over here, obviously they appear striated. You can see that clearly, they're striated over here. But these black lines are the intercalated discs. Okay, see, intercalated disc. Okay, so you have a striated muscle, your skeletal muscle, that is your smooth muscle, and your cardiac muscles. Okay, clear? Next question. Okay, so yeah, this I just put an extra diagram just to show you what fusiform looks like. So clearly it looks like your arm muscle, right? It looks like the arm muscle. This is what fusiform shape looks like. It's for your information, just for you to clarify. Okay, next question. Okay, question number 9. The contractile protein of skeletal muscle involving ATPase activity is, this appeared in 2006. So you have A, troponin, B, tropomyosin, C, myosin, D, alpha actinin. So clearly we have already discussed this. It is C, myosin. Okay, it has ATPase activity. Answer is C. So the myosin monomer consists of 2 parts. All this is there in NCERT. Okay, heavy meromyosin and light meromyosin. Now meromyosin usually means a part of myosin. So it has heavy meromyosin and light meromyosin. It forms the main structure, the myosin monomer. Now the globular head is heavy meromyosin. Okay, it is a part of the heavy meromyosin, and short arm and tail is called the light meromyosin. Okay. Now the head has 2 functions. First function, it consists of active sites that form cross bridges with actin filaments. Now we've seen the actin filaments has active sites, and the myosin head also has active sites, actin attachment sites. Okay, where both of them will form an attachment. Okay, that is one part of the one of the functions of the head of the myosin. Second function is that an ATPase enzyme is present there, which cleaves ATP to derive energy for muscle contraction. Clearly, like I already mentioned to you, you need the power stroke, right? You need to move, right? So for that, for the movement, obviously you need energy, correct? So the ATPase activity happens there in the myosin head, which converts ATP to ADP. Okay, so there are 2 functions of the head. Please remember, this could be a possible MCQ question. Okay, what are the 2 functions of the myosin head? Okay, so this is what a myosin filament looks like. the myosin, the complete myosin filament over here. This is the myosin molecule. This is monomer. Okay, and you have the light meromyosin and you have the heavy meromyosin. Okay, this is the head. This is the tail part. All right. Okay. Next question. Okay, so over here, what you see is the cross bridges forming. Yeah. Okay, with the actin. Okay, this is the actin over here. The cross bridge forms here. These are hinges. Now you know what? This is extra piece of information. Now hinges are present here. Okay, so it is easy to move. Similarly, there are some hinges present over here also. Okay, the head. So it is easy for the head to move. Okay, and this bottom part to move of the myosin. Okay, so these are actually hinges. Okay, like I'm showing you the hand structure, so they move like that. Okay, they actually hinges over here in the myosin filament. This is an extra piece of information just for you to understand that once the cross bridges form, when the pass stroke happens, how does it move? Okay, but for neat point of view, just understand that there is a attachment, a cross bridge is formed and a pass stroke takes place. Okay, and this is with the help of ATPase. Okay, ATP gets converted to ADP, and so there are two functions for the myosin head. Okay, next question. Question number 10. Which statement is correct for muscle contraction? This appeared in 2001. A. Length of H zone decreases. B. Length of A band remains constant. C. Length of I band increases. D. Length of 2Z line increases. Okay, so clearly during muscle contraction we already discussed this. Length of A band remains the same. Okay, right? So the answer is B. Again, like I already said, we've already discussed, is a very important piece of information, okay, to remember. So there are like few questions, 2-3 questions, I think 2 or 3, I'm not sure, that are related to this particular piece of information. So I would suggest you remember this. Okay, so during muscle contraction, I band length decreases. Like I've already discussed that. A band length remains the same. Okay, like you come back to the same diagram over here. So you have I band over here. Okay, what happens when maximum contraction happens? It's almost negligible, the distance, okay, the space that is. And but the A band remains the same even after maximum contraction. Okay, clear? I guess this was very direct. I've already discussed this before. Move on to the next question. All right, question number 11. What is a sarcomere? This is basic, guys. If you didn't know this, then go back and read the chapter. This appeared in 2001. A. Part between two H line, part between two A line. C. Part between two I band, and D. Part between two Z line. We just saw the structure of sarcomere multiple times. It should be embedded in your brain by now. Part between two Z line is a sarcomere. Okay, so your answer is B. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So the portion between two successive Z lines is the functional and the structural unit of contraction, which is called a sarcomere. Okay, I have a diagram here. Yeah, so you have the Z line here and this black line over here, which is also another Z line, and this is one sarcomere. Okay, pretty much this is all in the NCERT. Please read it. All right, next, I guess this was pretty simple. Part between two Z line, sarcomere. Okay, next question. All right, so question number 12. Which of the following is a contractile protein of a muscle? This appeared in 1998. Right, an old question. All right, so which of the following is a contractile protein of a muscle? A. Tropomyosin, B. Tubulin, C. Myosin, D. All of these. So, already discussed this, guys. C. Myosin. Okay, that is the contractile protein of the muscle. So actin and myosin are the contractile proteins of muscle. We've already discussed this. Okay, is there an NCRT also under a topic called contractile proteins? So they have explained the structure of actin and myosin there. Okay, so actin and myosin are the contractile proteins of muscle. There's not much explanation required. It's quite direct, right? So if in the place of myosin it said actin, then you know you have to choose actin. Okay. All right. Next question. Question number 13. The functional unit of contractile system in striated muscle is, let's appear in 1998. A. Sarcomere, B. Z-band, C. Cross bridges, D. myofibril. So the functional unit of contractile system is sarcomere, right? Answer is A. We already discussed this. Okay. So the portion between two successive Z lines is the functional unit of contraction, which is called sarcomere. Again, direct question. There was not much explanation required for this. It's just fact. You need to remember this. Okay. Yeah, so here you have a diagram of the sarcomere. This is very, very important from NCRT. Please, guys, please study the diagrams of NCRT very, very carefully. Okay, for your exam. Okay, next question. Question number 14. When a muscle bends one part upon the other, it is called, this appeared in 1996. It's another old question. A. Abductor, B. Regulator, C. Extremer, D. Flexor. So when a muscle bends one part upon the other, it's called flexor. Answer is D. Okay. Let's go to the discussion. Now, flexor is a type of movement when the muscle bends one part of a limb on another limb at a joint. Okay, now you see biceps, one part of the limb to another part with the help of a joint, at a joint. Example, biceps of the arm. What I showed you is biceps of the arm. I don't know if you can see it, but you can see for yourself the arm muscle over here. There's the biceps of the arm, and when you bend one part to another at a joint, that's a hinge joint, it's called the flexor. The opposite movement is called extensor. When you move away, okay, when you move away. Now that time biceps of the arm are not doing the job at the when you're doing the extensor wala position. Okay, when you're doing the extensor position, the opposite movement happens. It is the opposite of flexor, but that time biceps of the arm are not functioning. What is it called? It's called triceps. Okay, the triceps are the muscles below. Okay, so they are doing that job. All right. So flexor is called the bicep part, and extensor is the tricep. All right. So you have a very good diagram here. This, please mind you, that's belly. Okay, belly of bicep. Here. So this is the flexor part. Okay, at your hinge joint. And this is the triceps part, the extensor part. Okay, below muscle here. Okay, so you have the flexor, you have the extensor. I just given you extra piece of information to answer your question. Yes, it is flexor. Okay, it is the flexor when muscle bends one part upon the other. Okay, clear? I guess biceps, triceps, easy to remember. Muscles, right? People are building their bodies, they use their biceps and triceps. They exercise those muscles, especially the arm muscles, that is. Okay, clear? Next question. Okay, question number 15. Match the following columns and select the correct option. It's appearing in NEET 2020, is quite recent. You have A, B, C, D. Let's do the match. Floating ribs. Okay, floating ribs, they do not connect with the sternum. Acromion is connected to the clavicle. Scapula Scapula is located between the second and the seventh rib. Glenoid cavity attaches to the head of the humerus. So your answer is A4, B3, C1, correct, and D2. So your answer should be B. Answer is B. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So floating ribs are called the vertebral ribs. Please remember this. Okay, this vertebral ribs has come in another question. Okay, so if they write vertebral ribs, they're talking about floating ribs. Okay, and they are the 11th and 12th pairs of ribs. Okay, and they do not connect with the sternum anteriorly. Okay, sternum is in the anterior. Okay, the ventral part. So these 11th and 12th ribs are called floating ribs. They do not connect with the sternum. The acromion process of scapula. The acromion process is actually present in the scapula. Okay, and this articulates, that means it forms a connection, it forms a joint with the acromial end of the clavicle to form the acromioclavicular joint. I have a diagram for this, so don't worry. So just remember, scapula acromion process is present in the scapula, and this connects with the acromial end of the clavicle, that is your collarbone. Okay, scapula is the flat bone that is present behind, and so they connect to form the acromioclavicular joint. Scapula is a large triangular bone situated in the dorsal part of the thorax between the second and the seventh rib. Okay, this is the location of scapula. The lateral of the glenoid angle, okay, is broad and contains the glenoid cavity or fossa. It articulates with the head of the humerus. Okay, so this is present in the scapula. So if you look at the lateral part of the scapula, there is a glenoid angle which is broad. It contains a glenoid cavity. It's also called a fossa. The cavity is also called a fossa. Okay, and that cavity connects with the head of the humerus. Okay, it's important even in MPBS to understand the anatomy of the skeleton. Okay, so clearly, to answer your question, yes, I've covered all 4 points, options that were there, and I've said how they were connected with each other, right? Add to that, yeah. So floating ribs do not connect with the sternum. Acromion process that's present in the scapula, they connect with the clavicle. The scapula is located between the second and the seventh rib, and glenoid cavity, that is the lateral part of the scapula, has a glenoid cavity in it which connects to the head of the humerus. I have some diagrams, don't worry, but these are taken from medical textbooks for your information. Actually, I just wanted to give you to help you to visualize what it actually looks like. Okay, because I think the NCERT diagrams weren't very good. So I thought that maybe if I show you these diagrams, you'll be able to visualize what it actually looks like. Now this is the scapula. Okay, this is what it looks like. Okay, and this is the humerus. So humerus is pretty long. Okay, and so scapula is present between the second and the seventh rib. Okay, so you have the acromion process over here. Now what you're seeing here is the right scapula. Okay, the right side, the anterior view, the front view. Okay, what you're seeing is the right scapula. This is my right. Okay, and the front view. So you have the acromion process over here, which connects to the clavicle. The clavicle is not shown here. The acromial process is there in the clavicle also, acromial end, sorry. And you have the scapula here, and you have your humerus over here. So this lateral structure that I was talking about, this glenoid angle, this is called a glenoid angle. So if you look at it laterally, okay, laterally like this, you will see the glenoid cavity, okay, which connects to the head of the humerus. Okay, it connects to the head of the humerus. So what you're seeing over here in this left diagram over here, this is the front view. Now over here you're seeing the same right side, but the posterior, that is the back side, okay, the dorsal side. So here you can see the back portion. You can see the acromion over here, and you have the humerus and the connection over here. Okay, So basically, don't worry. You don't need to worry in terms of NEET, but I thought this would help you. Let me know if you liked it or not in the comments below, to help you understand what it actually looks like. Okay, so over here, what you see on your right is the clavicle, the collarbone, and you see the superior aspect, that is the top part, okay, of the right clavicle. Okay, so you see the acromial end over here. Okay, that's where it joins with the acromial process of the scapula. Okay, and here you see the inferior aspect, the bottom part of the clavicle. This is the thoracic cage, the rib cage. This is taken from NCERT. So no excuses for that. You need to study the diagram. Okay, this is taken from NCERT. So you have the floating ribs here that we just spoke about, 11th and 12th rib. They're not connected to the sternum. Then you have the false ribs here, 8th, 9th and 10th. Okay, and then you have the true ribs over here. Okay, they're directly connected to the sternum. Now 8th, 9th and 10th are called false ribs. That is, the 8th rib connects to the 7th rib. The 9th rib connects to the 8th rib. The 10th rib connects to the 9th rib. Okay, they don't directly connect to the sternum. Okay, they're false ribs. 11th and 12th don't connect at all. Okay, so at least anteriorly, obviously. Posteriorly, yeah, they're connected to the vertebral column. Anteriorly, they're not connected to the sternum. It's very, very important to remember in terms of NEET. Okay. Okay, so question number 16. Select the correct option. This appeared in NEET 2019. A. There are 7 pairs of vertebrosternal, 3 pairs of vertebrochondral, and 2 pairs of vertebral ribs. And this is what I was talking about, vertebral ribs. Now, when you see this term, don't get confused. These are actually floating ribs. Okay, these are called floating ribs. B. 8th, 9th and 10th pairs of ribs articulate directly with the sternum. 11th and 12th pairs of ribs are connected to the sternum with the help of hyaline cartilage. D. Each rib is a flat thin bone and all the ribs are connected dorsally to the thoracic vertebrae and ventrally to the sternum. Okay, so you have to select the correct option. Clearly A seems to be the appropriate option. There are 7 pairs of vertebrosternal ribs, correctly, yes. 3 pairs of vertebrochondral ribs, yes. 2 pairs of vertebral or floating ribs, yes. 8th, 9th and 10th pairs of ribs articulate, they do not articulate directly with the sternum. 11th and 12th pairs of ribs are connected to the sternum with the help of hyaline cartilage, no, that's also incorrect. And each rib is a flat thin bone and all the ribs are connected dorsally, no, to the thoracic vertebrae and ventrally to the sternum, no, clearly no. So answer is A over here. Okay, B, C and D, all 3 are incorrect. I need to select the correct option. Let's go to the discussion. There are 7 pairs of vertebrosternal ribs, okay, and 3 pairs of vertebrochondral ribs and 2 pairs of floating or vertebral ribs. Please, this also information has to be embedded in the head, okay, they've clearly been asking it again and again. So you need to remember this information. 8th, 9th and 10th rib join the next higher cartilage. I already explained how it connects. Okay, 8th will connect to the 7th, 9th connects to the 8th, and 10th connects to the 9th. They don't articulate with the sternum. 11th and 12th rib don't articulate with the sternum either. Okay, so sorry about that. So to answer your question, clearly I already discussed it. B, C, D are incorrect. A is the correct option. Okay, and this is in 2019, so it's quite recent. Okay, question number 17. Out of X pairs of ribs in humans only, Y pairs are true ribs. Okay, select the option that correctly represents values of X and Y and provides their explanation. This appeared in 2017. So X pairs of ribs. Now, how many pairs of ribs are there? We know there are 12 pairs of ribs in humans. Yeah, or that Y pairs are true ribs. Obviously, we know 7 pairs are true ribs. Correct? So, if you look at A, option A, X is equal to 12, Y is equal to 5, clearly incorrect. X is equal to 24, no. X is equal to 24, Y is equal to 12, no. D is the right answer. X is equal to 12 and y is equal to 7. That fits the equation. Let's read the explanation. True ribs are attached dorsally to the vertebral column, correct, and ventrally to the sternum, correct. We've already discussed it. We've seen a diagram also of the rib cage. This answers the question. So answer B. Okay, so there are 12 pairs of ribs, out of which there are 7 pairs of true ribs. Okay, true ribs, they attach dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum, right? And yeah, so we have a diagram from NCERT again. Please study these diagrams. So they've asked this multiple times: true ribs, false ribs, floating ribs. They've asked this so many times. This is clearly an important topic, okay, in terms of meat. Clearly an important topic. So you have 7 pairs of true ribs, you have 3 pairs of false ribs, and you have 2 pairs of floating ribs. That makes it 12 pairs of ribs. Okay, so clear? Alright, so we've come to the end of this video lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed today's video lecture. It's very extensive and I hope you've learned something new today. And please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to MG Neat Biology. And I'm also available on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, so you can go check out my profile there, and do follow there for more updates. Okay, and I'll see you in the next video lecture. All right, so bye.